just, Aaron, on that issue of the nolli prosecute certificates and the summons, what essentially then is the President's case?
Well, the President says that the first nolli prosecute, which names Advocate Billy Downer specifically from June, that one expired 3 months later. And the second nolli prosecute, which is the more generic one, does not refer to the alleged crime he's accused of committing at the end of August. And he says that a nolli prosecute needs to be given by the DPP in the relevant province once the DPP has reviewed a specific individual and specific crimes that individual is alleged to have committed. He says that simply did not happen in the case of the November certificate, which Zuma depended upon. But Thembekile, if we have a look at what's actually in the heads of argument from the President, he says his case is that the summonses were issued without a valid nolli prosecute certificate that relates to the applicant, that's him, Cyril Ramaphosa, for an alleged offence or charge against the applicant, again to him, that the certificates don't pertain specifically and narrowly to him. If we move further along into Ramaphosa's submissions filed today in the South Gauteng High Court, we'll see in the second quotation that we've pulled out for you some more details on that, and it will be on your screen in just a moment, the second quotation. Ramaphosa says that the Constitution does not allow for the court to permit what he's claiming is Zuma's deliberate and unprovoked abuse of highly coercive and invasive statutory or state power by any person. You're seeing further quotes from those heads of argument from the President. He says that if he is subjected or submitted to the criminal proceedings on the 9th of January, his constitutional rights and reputation will be irreparably harmed. He insists in the interest of justice and the public interest that he not be subjected to that criminal private prosecution hearing on the 19th. And he says that his rights will have been irredeemably trampled and his constitutional rights such as the right to freedom of movement, dignity, and so on.
Let's talk about the two politicians now, and the issue of disagreement around urgency. What does Ramaphosa say that would happen at this point if the court does not urgently intervene?
He says that he will be subject to irreparable harm. And here you see a real contrast between the submissions of the former president and the current president. Zuma saying in his heads of argument today, the court appearance on the 19th will likely be brief and the matter will likely be postponed. But Ramaphosa's argument is that this is the very issue. He cannot be dragged to court in an illegitimate criminal private prosecution and then expected to stand in court in something which is based on null and void documents, the summonses and the nolli prosecute. And he highlights the irreparable damage that would be incurred upon him and his rights if this isn't stopped in its tracks by this urgent interim interdict. You'll see there that he says if he's subjected to those criminal proceedings, his constitutional rights and reputation will be irreparably harmed. Thembekile, in his papers, he refers to several rights. He also refers to the interests of the country, his presidential duties. For example, we know that he will be going off to Davos even before that 19th of January date. And he talks about the economy as well. And there again, you see disagreements between Ramaphosa and Zuma around what will befall the president if he is forced to show up on the 19th of January.
And they both claim, don't they, that they're being harassed in this process?
They do indeed. Zuma argues that he's been harassed by a persecutor turned prosecutor or prosecutor turned persecutor in the case of Advocate Billy Downer. Ramaphosa argues that this vexatious and spurious, faulty prosecution by Zuma is an harassment of him. Here's what he says in his submissions. The purpose of this private criminal prosecution by Zuma is not genuinely to obtain a criminal conviction in respect of a criminal offense, an alleged criminal offense. Ramaphosa says Zuma is trying to harass him for political ends.
And Aaron, just lastly, you have been reading these documents now for several hours. Is there anything that is not perhaps in the mainstream that you've noted that you think is actually worth our attention at this point, going into the hearing tomorrow?
Well, yes, Thembekile, I think there are two things. The one thing is that Ramaphosa makes it clear, not in the head submitted today, but that replying affidavit he submitted yesterday, that he's very mindful of his duty to appear in court if he were charged rightfully and correctly in a criminal case. he makes that clear that he has a duty as a law-abiding citizen to comply and appear in court. What he says he should not be required to do is appear in court in a matter that is effectively a sham, effectively a trick, which is based on illegitimate documents which have been incorrectly issued, in the case of both those nollie prosequi and the summonses. And then here, Tembekile, from the heads of argument, are two things that stood out for me. The first one, I think, is the most noteworthy because it's the only time in the heads that we see and read the president using the word I. He says, I made several attempts to engage and settle the matter with Mr. Zuma to avoid litigation, the matter there being the issue of the defective summons. He says Mr. Zuma was given multiple opportunities to withdraw the summons against a clear demonstration that the summons was unlawful and an abuse. This is an appropriate case to order punitive costs against Mr. Zuma. So Ramaphosa wants punitive costs against the president, and it seems that Zuma wants, in fact, the very same thing against him for bringing this urgent interim interdict application. So we'll hear more from those heads of argument and further submissions when they go toe-to-toe in the South Gauteng High Court tomorrow, 10 o'clock.